Welcome to User State and User State Migration. The topics in this module include how to migrate user profile information with the User State Migration tool, for example, during an operating system migration, how to create roaming user profiles and mandatory user profiles, somewhat older techniques that some organizations still use, setting up folder redirection, which is generally favored these days over roaming profiles, and standardizing the user experience by enforcing a specific start screen layout. Well, the first and longest topic, migrating user profile information with the USMT. The USMT is included in the WADK mega download, and it's also used in the background by both the MDT and SCCM, discussed elsewhere in this course. So what does Microsoft mean when it refers to the user state? Well, Windows has long maintained a separation between user-specific settings and machine-specific settings. The user state, in a nutshell, is everything that a user has personalized, from settings that live in the registry to documents and files that the user has created. Now, user state data might live inside the formal user profile, that is, the user's folder under the parent users folder on the local drive, or perhaps outside it, so the USMT has to account for that. The user's settings might be specific to the operating system, such as desktop background, or specific to particular applications, such as the user's word processor, and again, these settings can live in different places. User settings might be contained in files, such as the old but still kicking INI suffix, or registry settings in the registry's HKey current user or HKCU branch, corresponding to the file ntuser.dat on the disk, which you can see in the user's top-level profile folder if you enable the viewing of hidden and system files in File Explorer. If applications play by the rules, then they will store user-specific, application-specific settings and/or files in a hidden folder named App Data in the user's profile, as we see here. The local and local low folders contain files that do not synchronize across the network if the user has roaming profiles enabled. We'll talk about those in a couple of minutes. And the roaming folder contains files that do sync in the roaming profile scenario. Okay, well, this is all fine, but why should we be concerned about migrating the user state? Frankly, we don't always need to be. If we're doing an in-place upgrade to Windows 10, we might not need to worry about it. After all, the whole point of that choice is to preserve user state information. However, if we're performing an OS migration, then exporting the user state prior to installing Windows 10 will save users from having to recreate their operating system and application settings after Windows 10 is installed. Ditto for application settings, as long as they're where the USMT expects to see them. Of course, the user state includes documents, including maybe pictures, videos, music, and so forth. And that data may be on the network somewhere too, but if it isn't, we may need to migrate it. And finally, using the USMT is likely to be way faster than more manual methods. So, why not use the Windows Easy Transfer Wizard? A tool that's been around for years and works pretty well, and even has the word easy in the name. It's certainly simpler than the USMT programs. Well, the answer is that you can use it, but Microsoft doesn't support it anymore. It's one of those deprecated products, a fancy $10 word, meaning that it's on the way out, and in fact, it's not included with Windows 10. So you'll have to grab a copy from a Windows 7 or 8 system. Either version will work. However, WET is not a scalable solution, so if you have hundreds or thousands of computers to migrate, it's not going to be such a great solution, and Windows Easy Transfer doesn't give you the fine degree of control that the USMT programs Scan State and Load State do. Well, and now to the IT admin's favorite word, scenarios. The first scenario for using the USMT is called wipe and load, or sometimes refresh the PC. The idea here is that we're not changing out hardware, we're just getting a new operating system onto an existing machine. And that's actually very feasible given that hardware from 5 years ago is generally quite capable of running Windows 10. Now, the next scenario is the replace computer situation, where we are getting new hardware in the door. However, whichever scenario you're looking at, the USMT works quite similarly. It's just that the commands may be running on different devices. By the way, you can run the USMT a couple of different ways. You can run it manually, in which you execute the commands yourself with appropriate syntax, and we'll look at some of that in a few moments. Or you can use it automagically, i.e. with the MDT 2013 or with System Center Configuration Manager 2012, where the USMT operates more or less behind the scenes, and the deployment platform can shield you from the gory details. The basic concept is that we're going to save the user state someplace safe, then install the operating system, and then bring the user state back. So where is that someplace safe? Well, it could be a non-operating system hard drive. It could be the system hard drive. Even in a refresh PC scenario, if we use a tricky construct called a hard link migration store that can withstand an operating system installation without itself getting wiped out. A local USB drive would also work. A network share might be better because it can't get put into the washing machine by accident. Actually, I think it's the dryer that really does in those USB sticks. And if I'm using a deployment tool such as SCCM, there will be a machine designated to store user state information, such as a so-called state migration point. And in the case of the MDT, the deployment share can actually be used for this purpose as well. Now, we should take a closer look at what is actually in the USMT. There are 3 executables to know about. Scan state, which in general is responsible for exporting the user state to the designated safe place. Load state, which will bring it back after Windows 10 is happily installed. And USMT utils, which performs various house cleaning chores such as checking a migration store for corruption or deleting a leftover hard link migration store. Along with the executables are some text format configuration files in XML form. Now, the ones that begin with MIG for migration aren't really meant for you to edit directly, although you can. migapp.xml specifies what to migrate with respect to application settings. miguser.xml specifies what files in the user profile to migrate based on file suffixes, and generally works best if users tend to store files inside their profile. So it's making decisions based on file suffixes. migdocs contains rules based on file locations, and migdocs, although it also specifies what files to migrate, it may work better than miguser if users are storing files outside of their profile. You should just pick the one that seems to work best for your organization, but you really shouldn't use miguser and migdocs together, so that may require a little bit of experimenting. Finally, config.xml is actually a file that you build and that is reasonably convenient to edit, at least if you're deciding things that you don't want to migrate. I'll show you how that works in a moment, but first, one more quick tip. The USMT does not migrate certain customizations a user may have made, such as local printers, device drivers, and permissions for shared folders. All right, well, that's more than enough talking. Let's take a look at some command line syntax so you can get the flavor of how to use the USMT. By the way, there are lots of good detailed documents on TechNet once you have the concepts down. Okay, so here I am at one of the GlobalMantics workstations. If I right-click the Start button, I can open up a regular command prompt, which will open up in my user profile. I can do a directory and see the usual folders here. You notice that I don't see ntuser.dat because that is actually a hidden file. So if I do a dir/a:/h to show hidden files, then indeed we can see that ntuser.dat is present and accounted for, along with various log files pertaining to it. You can also see some junctions here that were put in place by Microsoft so that any programs that might be looking for old names or old locations of the user profile folders can be bounced over to the correct new locations. Well, now let's take a look at the USMT, specifically scan state. That's going to require elevated privileges, so I'll open up an administrative command prompt here. And I've already mapped a drive Z to the ADK folder for convenience. And so let's CD to the user state migration tool and see what's there. We'll go ahead and CD again to the AMD 64 for the 64-bit flavor. And if I take a look at star.xml, I can see some of the MIG files that we chatted about earlier. So what I'm going to do now is generate a config.xml that I can then modify to control the performance of scan state. So the syntax for that is going to be scan state / gen config, and then typically we call it config.xml. You could call it something else if you wanted. And then the MIG files that I'm going to use are going to be MIG app for application settings. And then I'll do /i to include MIG user.xml. And although it says starting the migration process, it's not actually migrating anything. In this case, with this syntax, I'm just building the config.xml file. And I love it when I get a success message. So now I can open up that config.xml and we can take a look at it. And this is something that is more or less editable by human beings. So we can see here a list of all the things that are going to be migrated if I did a scan state run for real. And I can come in here and change those migration settings by coming in here and changing a yes to a no, and then saving config.xml out. Adding things that are not in config.xml is a bit more complex process, a little bit more involved for our video here, but just be aware that it can be done as well. But the easy thing is just to come in here and say, well, these are some things that I don't really need to migrate. Just change yes to no, and then specify the /config:/config.xml parameter when you run scan state for real, and specify a target where the migration store should live.